Welcome back to the Grenke Chess Festival Freestyle Open A, and round 8 is absolutely electric at the top. Vincent Kayama and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave share the lead on 7 points, with Magnus Carlsen, Jan-Krzysztof Duda, Alexei Sarana, and Aryan Chopra all breathing down their necks on 6.5. Hans Niemann sits on 6 points and cannot afford to slip. One decisive game is on our board today. And it is a wild ride through a chaotic freestyle position that spirals into a breathtaking mating finish. Moke Niemann, the American Grandmaster with a reputation for sharp, uncompromising play, needs a win to keep pace with the leaders. Krishnan Sasikiran, the veteran Indian Grandmaster known for deep positional understanding and in-game technique, enters as significant rating underdog. With Niemann on 6 points and needing every half point, the pressure is squarely on the high-rated player to convert. White opens with f4, the bird's opening. One of the most ambitious and double-edged first moves available in a freestyle setup. This system, associated with grandmasters like Henrik Bird himself and later embraced by Bent Larsen, immediately stakes a claim on the e5 square and signals aggressive kingside intentions. The key strategic theme is control of the long diagonal and potential kingside pawn storms, though it does leave White's kingside slightly weakened from the very first move. White launches immediately with the bird's opening, staking a claim on e5 and declaring aggressive intentions from the very first move. This is a bold choice that immediately unbalances the position and invites Black to fight for the center. Black responds with c5, striking at the center from the queen side, but the engine considers this a significant inaccuracy in the freestyle context. With the f-pawn already advanced, this move does little to address White's control of e5 and misses more dynamic equalizing approaches. White develops the knight toward the kingside, eyeing the f5 square and supporting a future push in the center. This is a natural developing move that keeps all options open. Black sets up a fianchetto structure, aiming to place a bishop on the long diagonal, but the engine flags this as another inaccuracy. The kingside is now slightly weakened, and the g6 pawn can become a target given White's f4 setup. White claims queenside space with c4, and the engine notes this is a slight softening of the advantage. Nevertheless, it secures central territory and prepares to challenge Black's c5 pawn directly. Black pushes f5, challenging White's kingside pawn chain and creating immediate tension. This is an aggressive counterthrust, though it does weaken e5 in the process. White repositions the knight to b3, targeting the c5 pawn and continuing development toward active squares. Black defends the c5 pawn with b6, preparing a queenside fianchetto as well, though this slightly softens the dark squares on that wing. White strikes in the center with e4, opening up the position and creating immediate confrontation. This thematic push challenges Black's f5 pawn and grabs more central territory. Black captures on e4, accepting the pawn and opening the f-file. This is a natural recapture but hands White new piece activity. White develops the bishop to e3, supporting the center and preparing to recapture on e4 with a piece. The position is becoming quite complicated. Black strikes back in the center with d5, seeking counterplay and challenging the pawn on d5 that may follow. Active central play is Black's best resource in this double-edged structure. White captures on d5, opening the position further and creating a passed pawn that will be a long-term factor. Black maneuvers the knight to c7, defending the queenside and preparing to challenge the d5 pawn, an interesting regrouping that keeps the position fluid. White castles kingside, and the engine notes this as a small error, allowing Black to equalize slightly. The king finds safety, but the initiative is no longer pressing. Black recaptures the d5 pawn with the knight, centralizing powerfully and recovering the material deficit. The position is now roughly level. White recaptures on e4 with the knight, restoring material balance and maintaining a solid centralized piece. Black captures on f4, winning back the pawn and bringing the bishop to a very active diagonal. The game is in sharp balance. White retreats the bishop to f2, covering that square and preparing to reorganize. A quiet defensive move that keeps the position manageable. Black repositions the bishop to e6, targeting the d5 square indirectly and keeping piece coordination, a logical developing move. White centralizes the queen to e2, connecting the rooks and adding pressure along the e-file. The position remains balanced but full of tension. Black develops the queen to d7, eyeing the queenside and preparing to castle. A sensible consolidating move that improves coordination. White sacrifices material aggressively, taking on c5 with the knight and beginning a sequence of exchanges to simplify the position. Black recaptures on c5 with the pawn, opening the b-file and accepting a restructured pawn formation. White captures again on c5, targeting the queen on d7 with a discovered attack. The exchanges are forcing both sides toward a simplified middle game. Black responds by capturing on c5 with the rook, keeping the position active and staying in the game. White recaptures on c5, trading off pieces and steering the game toward a complex endgame where both sides have active pieces but reduced material. Black castles kingside, securing the king at last. The position is roughly equal and the game enters a complex middle game. White centralizes the bishop to e4, an active post from which it eyes both wings. White is starting to nudge for activity. Black challenges with bishop to g5, putting pressure on White's queen and maintaining piece activity on both sides of the board. White trades the rook for the rook on f8, forcing the king to recapture and stripping Black of a key defensive piece. Black must recapture with the king, which now steps onto an exposed square. The king is out in the open and will need to be careful. White delivers check with the queen on f2, pushing the king around and beginning to probe for weaknesses around the Black king. Black blocks the check with the knight on f7, a natural defensive interposition that also develops the piece. White grabs the i7 pawn with the bishop, winning material and beginning to activate the a-pawn as a potential passed pawn. A greedy but practical decision. Black activates the knight to f6, bringing it to an aggressive central post and threatening to coordinate with the other pieces. White retreats the bishop to c6, but the engine notes this gives up a significant chunk of the advantage. Black's pieces are now becoming more active than expected. Black centralizes the queen to d8, improving piece coordination and preparing to put pressure on White's position. White centralizes the queen as well, contesting the d-file and keeping an eye on both bishops on the board. Black activates the queen to i5, targeting White's i7 bishop and putting direct pressure on White's overextended pieces. White retreats the bishop to c5 to escape the queen's attack, but the engine shows Black has now gained a substantial advantage. The white pieces are slightly uncoordinated. Black pushes the knight to g4, threatening to invade further and increasing the pressure on White's position. White brings the rook to f1, activating it and defending the kingside against the incoming knight. Black repositions the bishop to f6, creating threats around the white rook and adding coordination between pieces. White sacrifices the exchange, trading the rook for the bishop on f6. This removes an important defending piece from Black's camp. Black recaptures with the knight, and with a significant material and positional advantage, the engine expects Black to convert, but the game is about to turn dramatically. White pushes the a-pawn to i4, beginning to activate the passed pawn as a distraction. The engine still favors Black, but White is making practical fighting moves. Black attacks with the knight to g4, targeting the g2 pawn and trying to open lines around White's king, but this turns out to be a significant mistake according to the engine, which wanted Black to consolidate more carefully. White plays g3, a shocking blunder that traps the bishop that would arrive on g2 and throws away an enormous advantage. The engine swings wildly, and suddenly what should have been a technical win for Black becomes a chaotic mess. This is one of the key turning points of the entire game. Black centralizes the knight to e5, a natural-looking move but another critical error. The engine indicates Black is throwing away a winning position with this move, and the advantage begins to evaporate rapidly. White develops the bishop to g2, suddenly activating it along the long diagonal. The pieces are beginning to find harmony. Black moves the queen to i6, and this proves to be another serious mistake. The queen steps away from the action at a critical moment, and the engine shows White's advantage climbing sharply. Black needed to maintain central pressure. White centralizes the queen powerfully to e4, suddenly creating threats on multiple fronts. The bishops and queen are beginning to coordinate in a menacing way. Black plays the knight to d3, a move that looks aggressive, but the engine flags as another inaccuracy. The knight is active, but White finds a way to stabilize and then counterattack. White repositions the bishop to d4, a strong centralizing move that defends and attacks simultaneously. Black plays bishop to b3, targeting the d1 square, but this turns out to be a major mistake. The engine evaluation flips from Black being better to White now holding a slight edge. a critical moment where the advantage changes hands. White pushes the passed pawn to I5, advancing it with tempo and creating a concrete threat on the queen side. Black pushes E5, trying to activate the center and create counterplay. The position is now level according to the engine. White places the bishop on B6, an active square where it targets the queen and the I7 area while keeping the A-pawn protected. Black moves the king to G7, activating it slightly and connecting with the kingside pawns. The engine now tilts slightly in White's favor. White retracts the G2 bishop to F1, a regrouping move that repositions the bishop for new duties on the C4 diagonal. Black activates the bishop to C4, targeting the D3 pawn and creating counterplay on the long diagonal. White plays B3, chasing the bishop away and beginning to restrict Black's pieces. Black retreats the bishop to B5, maintaining some pressure but giving White more room to maneuver. White centralized the queen to D5, a powerful square where it simultaneously threatens multiple pawns and pieces. Black plays H6, creating some luft for the king, but also weakening the G6 pawn slightly. White advances H4, beginning a kingside pawn advance that will target Black's H and G pawns. Black pushes H5 to fix the kingside pawn structure and prevent White's H-pawn from advancing further. White reactivates the bishop to E2, pointing it at the H5 pawn and preparing to increase pressure. Black retreats the king to G8 and the engine marks this as a serious mistake. The king steps into a zone where White's pieces can quickly coordinate for an attack. The advantage swings sharply in White's favor. White plays queen to E6, and though the engine considers this slightly imprecise compared to the best continuation, it still maintains a clear advantage. The queen is actively placed, targeting G6 and putting Black under real pressure. Black brings the king back to G7, trying to get out of danger. The position remains very tense. White repositions the bishop to F3, adding pressure on the G6 pawn and preparing to increase the mating threats. Black jumps the knight to B4, threatening White's pawn on B3 and trying to create some counterplay, but this is a catastrophic mistake. With the knight leaving the defensive structure, Black allows White to launch a devastating attack. The engine evaluation surges by 4 full pawns in White's favor. White places the bishop powerfully on E4, a beautiful square from which it targets G6 while also controlling key diagonals. The mating net is beginning to take shape. Black tries bishop to D3, attacking the queen, but this is the final blunder in a sequence of errors. The engine evaluation goes completely off the charts. White now has a forced checkmate. White captures on G6 with check, a stunning queen sacrifice that rips open the Black king's shelter. The queen takes the pawn with check, and the mating attack is now unstoppable. Black is forced to retreat the king to F8, stepping into the firing line of White's remaining pieces. There is no escape. White delivers check with the bishop to C5, and the mating net is fully drawn. Every square around the Black king is controlled or attacked. Black is forced to retreat the king to E8, still completely surrounded with no escape route. White delivers checkmate with queen to G8, a beautiful final blow. The queen slides to G8 with check, and there is no defense. Niemann delivers a stunning mating finish from what appeared to be a lost in-game. What a remarkable turnaround. Sasikiran had a winning advantage for much of the middle game and in-game, but a series of inaccuracies beginning around the knight maneuver to G4 allowed Niemann to claw back. The final combination. Sacrificing the queen on G6 and delivering a forced checkmate with the bishop on C5, followed by queen to G8, was a stunning finish that will be remembered long after this tournament. That is round 8 in the books, and Niemann picks up a crucial full point with one of the most dramatic mating combinations of the tournament. With Kayama and Vachier-Lagrave still leading on 7, the race at the top is far from over. Make sure you subscribe so you do not miss a single move as we head into the final rounds. Let us know in the comments what you thought of that mating finish.